I don't want anything from you. I don't know who you are. Leave my porch.
Celestine Prout said it through the screen door with the specific, controlled authority of a woman who has spent 58 years learning that the world does not automatically offer you safety. You establish it yourself, at the door, before you let anything in. The man on her porch was 30 years old. He was wearing a suit that cost more than Celestine made in 2 months. He was standing with his hands in front of him, not in his pockets, deliberately visible, deliberately open, the posture of someone who has thought carefully about how to approach this particular door. He had a driver waiting in a black car at the curb. He had been standing on the porch for 2 minutes before Celestine came to the door. He said quietly, "Mrs. Prout, my name is Tobias Wren. I run a foundation. I've been looking for you for 10 years, she said. I heard you the first time, he said. I knew your daughter. The screen door did not move, but something behind Celestine's eyes did. She said, "My daughter has been gone for 10 years, he said. I know. She's the reason I'm standing on your porch." The street behind him was quiet. It was a Tuesday afternoon in East Baltimore. The oak tree in the front yard made a long shadow across the porch, a bird somewhere in the neighbor's yard. Celestine looked at this young man, this 30-year-old white billionaire standing on her porch in Baltimore with his hands visible and his voice quiet, and she tried to find the angle. There was always an angle. She had been alive long enough to know there was always an angle. She said, "What do you want?" he said. "To give you something," she said. "Nobody gives people like me things without wanting something back." He said, "That's usually true. In this case, I need you to let me explain." She looked at him for a long time. Then she pushed open the screen door. She said, "You have 10 minutes. In the kitchen behind her, Gerald Prout was already on his feet. 62 years old, school custodian. A man who had built his life on the specific, unhurried strength of someone who does not act without thinking, but who, once thinking is done, does not hesitate. He put his hand on Celestine's shoulder as she came back through the door. He looked at the man on the porch. He said to Celestine, but loud enough, 10 minutes. What happened in the next hour in that living room on Gilmore Street in East Baltimore was going to produce something neither Celestine nor Gerald expected. Not money, not an apology, something larger than both. In 14 days, a story would run in a Baltimore newspaper that would reach every major national outlet. In 30 days, a foundation would be named. And in all of that, at the center of all of it, was a worn green notebook that Celestine Prout had kept in the drawer of her nightstand for 10 years. She had not been able to throw it away. She had not fully understood why. She was about to find out. Fate had been working on this story for a decade. It was ready now. Subscribe before we go further. Because what Tobias Wren said in that living room is the kind of thing that changes how you understand grief. And the part that stays with you is not the ending. It's the notebook. Deja Alcott had been Celestine's daughter from her first marriage. The name Alcott came from her father, Raymond, who had been in Celestine's life for 4 years before he was gone. Not dead, simply gone, in the way that certain people exit lives without drama or closure, leaving only the specific hollow of their absence. Deja had been Celestine's from the beginning, completely, without condition. Deja had been a bright child and a complicated teenager, and a brilliant young woman who had chosen nursing, because she said she wanted to be in the room where the difference was made, not down the hall from it. She had graduated from the University of Maryland School of Nursing at 21. She had worked at Mercy Medical Center in Baltimore. She had been killed in a car accident at 22. Not her fault. A driver running a red light at 11:14 on a Saturday night, and Deja was in the crosswalk on her way home from a late shift, and that was the entirety of how it happened. Quick, irreversible. The kind of thing that leaves no room for any of the adjustments the mind wants to make to a story when the story is unbearable. Celestine had received the call at 11:41. She had sat at the kitchen table until morning. She had not cried until Gerald came home from his shift at 6 a.m. and found her there. She had cried for a long time after that. She had kept Deja's things, not all of them. She had given clothes to people who needed them and books to the library, and the nursing equipment to a young woman in the neighborhood who was going to nursing school and who had been in Deja's kindergarten class. She had kept the green notebook. It was a standard composition notebook, the black and white marbled kind, that Deja had covered in green contact paper the way she covered all her notebooks, because she said the standard covers were depressing. Inside in Deja's handwriting were notes, not nursing notes, something else. Something that Celestine had read 3 times in the year after Deja died, and then put in the nightstand drawer and not opened again. She could not throw it away. She had not understood why until a 30-year-old man in a good suit stood on her porch and said her daughter's name. Tobias Wren had been 19 years old when he met Deja Alcott. He had been a patient at Mercy Medical Center for 4 days following a surgery, a routine appendectomy that had a complication, a post-surgical infection that extended what should have been an overnight stay into 4 days of IV antibiotics, and the particular enforced stillness of someone who has been moving fast their whole life and has suddenly been required to stop. He was 19. He was in his 2nd year at Johns Hopkins. His father was a software entrepreneur who had sold his first company when Tobias was 12, and his second when Tobias was 17. And Tobias had grown up in the specific environment of someone for whom resources are not a question, which had given him the particular combination of confidence and isolation that characterizes people who have everything available to them, except the experience of needing something they cannot immediately obtain. Being sick slowed him down. Being attended to by Deja Alcott stopped him, not romantically. That is important to say clearly, not romantically. Deja was 22 and working the night shift, and was professional and warm in the specific, practiced way of someone who has decided that the work is about the person in the bed, not about the worker at the bedside. She did not perform warmth, she simply had it. The way certain people have it, not because they decided to be kind, but because kindness was the operating condition, the default, the way they moved through the world. She had talked to him. Not about his condition, about everything else, about what he was studying and what he intended to do with it. About what she had intended to do with nursing and what she found the work actually was, which was different from what she had expected, not worse, just different, more physical, more logistical. More about the 1,000 small things that had to happen correctly in order for the one important thing to happen correctly. She talked to him about her mother, who worked hospital laundry, and who she said understood the institution from a direction that most people never considered. She said, "My mother has been in this building for 20 years. She knows where everything comes from and where everything goes. People think the clean sheets just appear." "She's why they appear," he had said. "Does she like the work?" She had thought about it. She had said, "She likes that it matters." "She doesn't like that nobody sees that it matters," he had said. "That seems like an important distinction," she had said. "Most of the important distinctions are the ones people don't make." She had come back the next morning on a different shift and continued the conversation. And the morning after that, and the morning after the appendectomy complication resolved and the infection cleared and Tobias Wren went home, she had given him a card with her email address on it. She had said, "Write me when you've figured out what you're going to do with the computer science degree." He had written. She had written back. They had corresponded for 6 months, not frequently, maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks. Emails that were substantive and specific, and that ranged across topics in the way that correspondence between two people who are genuinely interested in thinking can range. She had told him in one of those emails that she was keeping a notebook. She had said, "I'm documenting something I'm seeing at the hospital. I don't know what to do with it yet, but I know it needs to exist somewhere." He had written back, "What are you documenting?" She had not answered that email. 3 weeks later, he had received an email from a Mercy Medical Center administrator, informing him that his correspondence address had been provided by a hospital employee, and that the employee in question was no longer with the institution, and that any future correspondence should be directed through official channels. He had not understood what that meant. He had tried to find her through other means. He had found, instead, the obituary. He was 20 years old when he read it. He had sat with that for a long time. He had never stopped wondering about the notebook. The living room of the Prout house on Gilmore Street had a couch that had been reupholstered twice, and a lamp that had been Gerald's mother's, and a bookshelf that held, among other things, 3 framed photographs of Deja, one at her nursing school graduation, one at a family Christmas, one at the beach, laughing at something outside the frame. Tobias sat on the edge of the couch. Celestine sat in the chair across from him. Gerald stood near the kitchen doorway. Tobias said, "Your daughter and I corresponded for about 6 months when I was 19. She was my nurse at Mercy. She was extraordinary. I don't use that word casually." Celestine said nothing. He said, 6 months into our correspondence, she told me she was documenting something at the hospital. She didn't tell me what. 3 weeks later, I got a message from a hospital administrator saying she was no longer with the institution. I thought she'd just left. Then I found the obituary. He looked at his hands. He said, "I tried to find her family. I was 20. I didn't know how. I went back to school. I built a company. I built another one. I started the foundation." He paused. "I never stopped wondering what she was documenting. And I never stopped wanting to find her family and tell them that she mattered. That she specifically was the reason I do the work I do." He reached into his jacket. He took out a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it. He held it out to Celestine. She did not take it immediately. He said, "This is the email she sent me, the last one, the one that said she was documenting something." Celestine looked at the paper. She took it. She read it. It was Deja's words, Deja's email address at the top, Deja's syntax, the particular way she constructed sentences, with the specific rhythm that Celestine had heard for 22 years. Celestine pressed her lips together. Gerald moved from the kitchen doorway to the arm of her chair. He put his hand on her shoulder. She read the email twice. Then she stood up. She walked down the hall to the bedroom. She opened the nightstand drawer. She came back with the green notebook. She held it for a moment, standing in the middle of her living room. She said, "I kept this for 10 years and I didn't know why." She set it on the coffee table between herself and Tobias Wren. She said, "I think you need to read it." Willa Fontaine had worked hospital laundry at Mercy Medical Center for 17 years. She was 51 years old. She had worked alongside Celestine Prout for 9 of those years, side by side at the industrial folding tables, in the specific, intimate proximity of people who share physical work for enough hours that the conversation becomes its own continuous thing, picking up where it left off, not requiring context. She had known Deja. She had watched Deja come down to the laundry wing twice a month with extra food from the nurse's station on her floor, brought it specifically to the laundry workers because, she said, the kitchen always made too much, and the people who actually worked the hardest hours were always the farthest from the free food. She had loved Deja, not dramatically, quietly, the way you love someone who sees you. She had watched Celestine in the months after Deja died, had watched the specific way grief reshapes a person's posture, their pace, the way they fold a sheet. She had brought food to the Prout house 4 times in the first year. She had not said much. She had understood that sometimes the most useful thing you can do for someone in grief is show up, without requiring them to perform anything. When Celestine came back to work and told her, 2 days after Tobias Wren's visit, what had happened, Willa had listened for 40 minutes. At the end, she said, "What was in the notebook?" Celestine looked at her. She said, documentation. Deja was documenting a pattern. Patients on certain floors, the floors with the highest proportion of low-income patients, were receiving different care, slower response times, different medication protocols, fewer follow-up checks. She had been tracking it for 4 months with dates, room numbers, nurse-to-patient ratios, response time logs, Willa said. She documented all of that in a notebook, Celestine said, in green contact paper, so it wouldn't look like a hospital record. Willa was quiet for a moment, she said, and the administrator who sent that email to the young man, Celestine said, Dr. Harlan Foss. He was the floor administrator in 2014. Deja had requested a meeting with him 2 weeks before she died to present what she had documented. Willa looked at the table. She looked at Celestine. She said she asked for the meeting, and 2 weeks later, Celestine said, she died. And nobody ever knew what was in the notebook, Willa said. Until now, Celestine said, until now. Tobias Wren read the notebook that evening. He had asked permission to take it home to read carefully, and Celestine had said no, so he had stayed. Gerald had made coffee. Celestine had sat across the living room and watched a 30-year-old man in an expensive suit sit on her reupholstered couch and read her daughter's handwriting for 2.5 hours, page by page, with the concentrated attention of someone who understands that what they are reading is important and will not be rushed. He finished at 9:14. He put the notebook down on the coffee table. He looked at Celestine and Gerald. He said, I need to make 2 calls. He made the first call to Nadine Briggs, his foundation director. He said, Nadine, I found what I've been looking for. Get Celeste Cross on the phone. A pause. Tonight, he made the second call to Avery Stills at the Baltimore Chronicle. He said, Avery, I have something. I need to meet tomorrow. A pause. Yes, tomorrow morning. This cannot wait. He ended the calls. He looked at Celestine. He said, your daughter documented evidence of systematic care disparities across 6 floors of a major Baltimore hospital over a 4-month period. She collected dates, room numbers, nurse-to-patient ratios, medication delay logs, and comparative response time records between floors with different patient demographics. Celestine said. I know, he said. With your permission, I want to commission an independent health equity audit of Mercy Medical Center using this notebook as the evidentiary baseline, she said. What does that mean in plain language? He said. It means your daughter's notebook becomes the foundation of an official investigation into whether the hospital has been providing unequal care to patients based on their income and zip code. And if the investigation confirms what Deja documented, and I believe it will, the results will be submitted to the Maryland Department of Health, the hospital's accreditation body, and made public. Gerald said, that's not nothing. Tobias said, no, sir. It isn't. Celestine looked at the notebook on the coffee table. She thought about the nightstand drawer, 10 years, the notebook that she could not throw away. She said, and then what? He said. And then the Wren Foundation funds a permanent patient advocacy position at Mercy and at 2 other Baltimore hospitals, staffed by nurses trained in health equity monitoring and empowered to escalate care disparity concerns directly to independent oversight. Not to internal administrators, independent, he said. It will be called the Deja Alcott Patient Equity Program. The living room was very quiet. Gerald looked at Celestine. She looked at the notebook. She said she went to that administrator 2 weeks before she died. He said, I know, she said. She tried to do it the right way. He said, I know, she said. Nobody listened. He said. That ends now. She picked up the notebook. She held it for a moment, the worn green contact paper, the edges soft from handling, the composition pages slightly warped from humidity over 10 years in a nightstand drawer. She handed it to Tobias Wren. She said, use it. He took it with both hands. He held it the way you hold something that belongs to someone who is not there to hold it themselves. He said, "Yes, ma'am." The independent audit was commissioned within 72 hours. Celeste Cross, 44 years old, black woman, health law attorney at a Baltimore firm, filed the formal request with the Maryland Department of Health on a Thursday morning. Citing the Deja Alcott notebook as primary documentary evidence and requesting an expedited review, given the decade the documentation had been held without action. The request was granted. The audit was conducted over 30 days by an independent health equity firm brought in from outside Maryland. Dr. Harlan Foss, who had been the floor administrator in 2014 and who had been promoted twice in the intervening decade, was placed on administrative leave on day 14 of the audit when the investigators found, in the hospital's internal records, documentation of his receipt of Deja Alcott's meeting request and evidence that he had forwarded it to the hospital's legal department rather than scheduling the meeting. The legal department had sent the email to Tobias Wren through a standard contact blocking protocol used to limit external communications with hospital employees. That email, the one that told a 19-year-old that his correspondent was no longer with the institution, had been sent by Harlan Foss's assistant on Foss's instruction. 2 days after Deja's death, while the hospital was still managing the notification process to her family. It had not been sent to silence Tobias. The hospital had not known about Tobias. It had been sent to close the loop on any external contacts that Deja Alcott had been maintaining related to her internal documentation. The hospital had known about the notebook. They had not known where it was. They had not found it, because Deja Alcott had kept it at home, in her room, where her mother had found it after she died and had put it in a nightstand drawer and kept it for 10 years without fully understanding what she was keeping. That was what fate had been doing. For 10 years, waiting for a 30-year-old man who had been a 19-year-old patient to knock on the right door. Avery Stills's story ran in the Baltimore Chronicle 14 days after Tobias Wren sat on the Prout couch. The headline was precise and careful, the way good journalism is precise and careful. Hospital documents show decade of suppressed care disparity report. Foundation launches equity audit based on deceased nurse's notes. The story was 4,000 words. It named Deja Alcott. It named Harlan Foss. It described the notebook, the green contact paper, the 4 months of documentation, the meeting request that became an email that became a decade of silence. It named Celestine Prout. It quoted her once in the final section of the story. She had said, "I kept her notebook for 10 years because I couldn't throw away the last thing she was working on. I didn't know it was evidence. I thought it was just her thoughts. She was always writing things down." She had paused. She had said, she was always trying to make things right. The story was reprinted in 4 national outlets within 48 hours. It was shared 200,000 times on social media in the first week. Harlan Foss resigned from Mercy Medical Center on day 19 of the audit. The audit concluded on day 30 with findings that confirmed the care disparity pattern Deja Alcott had documented in 2014. Not identical, not static, but consistent with the structural conditions she had identified. Response time differentials between floors with different patient demographics, medication delay patterns, nurse-to-patient ratio discrepancies that correlated with zip code and insurance type. The findings were submitted to the Maryland Department of Health. The department opened a formal compliance investigation. Mercy Medical Center's new administration, 3 of the 4 senior administrators who had been in place in 2014 had since retired or left, issued a public statement acknowledging the findings and committing to the implementation of the Deja Alcott Patient Equity Program as the primary remediation structure. The program launched 6 weeks later, 3 hospitals, 4 full-time patient equity advocates, an independent oversight board. A direct escalation pathway to the Maryland Department of Health that bypassed internal administration. The first advocates were hired from nursing programs across Baltimore. They were trained by a curriculum that Celestine Prout helped develop, not because anyone asked her to, because she had sat down with Celeste Cross and Nadine Briggs and said, "I want to know what my daughter knew. I want to understand what she documented. And I want to make sure the people doing this work understand what they're protecting." She was 58 years old and worked double shifts in hospital laundry, and she spent 4 evenings building a patient advocacy curriculum. She did this because Deja had once said, "My mother understands this institution from a direction most people never consider." She had been right. She was always right. The naming ceremony happened on a Tuesday afternoon at Mercy Medical Center, the hospital's main conference room. Media present, the Maryland Secretary of Health, representatives from the State Nursing Association, the independent audit team, Celeste Cross, Nadine Briggs, Avery Stills, Tobias Wren, and Celestine and Gerald Prout, and Reverend Lenora Ape, who had been their pastor for 22 years, and who had presided over Deja's funeral, and who had driven herself to the hospital that afternoon without being asked, because she had heard about the ceremony from Celestine the previous Sunday and had said, "I'll be there." She was there. The hospital's new chief of medicine read a statement. She named the findings of the audit. She named the program. She named Deja Alcott. Tobias Wren spoke for 4 minutes. He told the story of the 4 hospital days when he was 19. He told the story of the correspondence. He told the story of looking for Celestine for 10 years and finding her on Gilmore Street. He said, "She gave me the notebook without hesitation. She had kept it for 10 years not knowing what it was. And when she understood, she handed it over the same way Deja documented the original evidence, quietly, without drama, because it was the right thing and she knew it." He looked at Celestine. He said, "Deja Alcott did not get to see this happen. She went to an administrator 2 weeks before she died and was not heard. This program exists because she didn't stop, because she kept writing. Because her mother kept the notebook." He paused. He said, "I don't know if there's a word for what it means that the person who changed my life when I was 19 also left behind the evidence that makes this room possible today. But whatever that word is, that's what this program is named for." Celestine stood up, not because she had prepared remarks, because she needed to be standing. She said she was 22 years old. She saw something wrong. She wrote it down. She tried to fix it the right way. She held the green notebook. She had asked for it back after the audit and Tobias had returned it, pressed against her chest. "She didn't get the chance," she said, "but she left enough." She looked at the room. She said, "She always left enough." Reverend Ape in the back row pressed her hand over her mouth. Gerald took Celestine's hand. She sat down. The room was very still. On the drive home, in the specific quiet of 2 people who have been together long enough that silence is its own language, Gerald drove and Celestine held the notebook in her lap. She had not opened it in the ceremony. She did not open it in the car. She held it the way you hold something that belongs to someone who cannot hold it anymore. Gerald drove. At a red light on North Avenue, he said, "She would have been 32. Celestine said, "I know," he said. "She would have gone back to that administrator again." She said, "Twice more." "At least," he said, "she never stopped when something was wrong." She said, "Never." He drove. She looked at the notebook. She thought about the nightstand drawer. 10 years. The thing she could not throw away that she did not fully understand. She understood now. Some things are kept because they are not finished, not because the person who was carrying them is still here to finish them, but because the work is real and the record exists and somewhere, eventually, Someone will knock on the right door and ask the right question, and the thing that needed to happen will happen. It just takes time. It takes patience that outlasts grief. It takes a mother who keeps a green notebook in a nightstand drawer for 10 years, because she cannot explain why she needs it, but she knows she does. It takes a 30-year-old man who has been looking for 10 years finally finding the right address. It takes fate, working slowly, the way it always works, not dramatically, patiently, until the moment is ready. The Deja Alcott Patient Equity Program is now in its first year of operation. In that year, patient equity advocates filed 47 formal escalations to the Maryland Department of Health, of which 31 resulted in directed corrective action by the hospitals involved. 0 of those escalations were suppressed by internal administration, because the pathway does not go through internal administration. Deja Alcott documented that clearly, 10 years ago. In a green notebook that her mother kept, Celestine Prout still works at Mercy Medical Center. She will retire in 4 years. When she retires, the hospital's laundry department will receive a dedicated patient experience grant from the Wren Foundation. A recognition, Tobias said when he announced it, that the people who ensure the clean sheets appear are as essential to patient outcomes as anyone in a clinical role. He said Deja had told him that, when he was 19 years old, 4 days after an appendectomy, in a hospital room in Baltimore, he had not forgotten. Some things you do not forget. Some things stay. Subscribe, because somewhere tonight, a 22-year-old nurse is writing something down in a notebook that nobody is watching her write. She doesn't know yet that it matters. She doesn't know yet what will come of it. She just knows something is wrong, and she is writing it down because that is what you do when you see something wrong, and you do not know what else to do, but you know you cannot let it exist only. Your head. Her mother will find it someday. Keep the notebooks, keep all of them. You will know why eventually.